Hi, everyone. Some of you I've met before. Et rebonjour, mes amis acadiens. I think we'll keep the conversation in English for John. Mais si vous avez des questions que vous aimeriez me poser en français après, je suis disponible.
Did she say something awful about it?
I'm playing with the AI. If you've done a tour of the show, you'll see that there's some Library of Congress classification numbers in different sections of the exhibition, and so I've sort of structured my questions for John along the lines of those classification systems, which John doesn't know because he asked me this morning when we met together not to tell him what I was going to do. So this first part will be best friends dash chickens. And we'll come back to this towards the end as well. So as Emily pointed out in her introduction, Emily and I met because John told us to find each other. And she's also kind of more of the kind of traditional art historian, I would say, of John's painting practice and process painting in general and how those things relate. So I might call on her to explain some things. And what I'm kind of here to talk about, or what I'd like to talk about, is more kind of how systems as process work in John's work, how there's a certain kind of relationality that's implied by the way that he does his work. So relationality almost as like or relationships as a material in the work. And then, how that relates to our bodies, and maybe I can get him to talk about feelings, but I'm not really, I'm not going to lay bets on that. And I also just want to acknowledge the work that Jane Tisdale has done in a lot of the restoration of the works that are in the exhibition, because that really was like a very deep labor of love, I think, and so thank you, Jane. So I met John when I was in 2003, so I was a lot younger, and I was on the board of La Centrale, which is a feminist artist-run center in Montreal, and I was also in the library, the master's degree of library program at McGill at the same time. So I was, learning a professional skill so I could have a full-time job. And somebody told me that I had to find John at this conference because he was like me, and that's how I met John. So I don't know if you have any memories of that conference, John, that you want to share. Mm-hmm.
Karen Trask, who's been here a couple of times now. The main thing in terms of what you said so far that comes to my brain is virtually everybody I know who's asked me something about the numbers that are on the wall has thought that it's the Dewey Decimal System.
Oh, but it's not.
No, I know, I realize that. But I just thought you should know that most people thought it was a Dewey Decimal System.
Well, I did provide both classification systems, but we picked Library of Congress because of the academic context.
Oh, I thought probably because that's the only one that I sort of know. At any rate, no, I don't. I remember we met, and it was in Quebec City in winter, as I recall. So it was cold, and there were a lot of artist-run center-type people there, and a lot of them were speaking in a language that I didn't understand, which isn't unusual for me since I moved to Canada. And I It's just a reflection of my laziness of not having learned French. And that's pretty much it. I remember we met. I can sort of visualize that, but that's about all I can say.
So I was the most memorable
That was
part.
like, I don't know if that's what I said. Is that what I said?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. You were.
So for me, what this meeting gave me was the sort of the beginnings of the understanding that one could be a librarian and also have an art practice, and what that art practice might look like, and that there was like a longer trajectory of these kinds of practices that were not necessarily the first art historical narrative that you were going to receive about someone. But when I was getting ready for today, I sent out a Facebook post asking people to list artists who had also worked as librarians, and quite a few people responded, and so I've started to compile this list, and it includes people like Lucy Lepard, who worked in the library at the Museum of Modern Art, and she also did research for curators, and that's sort of where her practice developed. And then also Ian Carr-Harris, who was the director of library services at OCAD, sort of probably around the same time that you were the director of library services at NASCAD. And then, oh, that's interesting. Do you want to tell us more?
Well, because we were both librarians and both had practices and had met in a couple of different places. I can't remember why. I guess he was having a show exhibition someplace. And not Parachute. What was the magazine out in Vancouver? They asked me to do an interview with him, which I did. This is like 1974 or 5, somewhere around then probably. Pre-computers and digital stuff. So I did an interview on tape and then spent the next 3 months transcribing it. And yeah, it was the first thing that I ever printed. What was the name of the magazine?
Is it Vanguard? Yeah.
Vanguard.
Yeah.
All I could think of was Vulture, and I knew it wasn't Vulture.
No.
Vanguard. Yeah. No, I've known Ian for quite a while. Haven't seen anything too much about him in recent years, but yeah.
Do we need to speak? Do we need you to speak in the microphone?
Sorry.
I'm not. I think there's some recording happening too, so I'm not sure how important the microphone is to recording.
Nope, I can keep that in mind.
Yeah.
I promise.
So if you missed it, it was a very jewel
move.
of a story about Ian Carr-Harris and an article in Vanguard, but you know, the rest of it will just have to be mystery. And then some other names that came up on the list is Marcel Duchamp, who in an interview very famously talks about working in libraries as a way of avoiding kind of the annoying drama of the art world. And then we have people like John Held Jr. or Jean Brown, who kind of build these personal collections that become museums or archives out of the Fluxus movement, which sort of touches on some of the communications-based art work that is in John's practice. And then someone like Peter Trepanier, who was the Reader Services librarian and the head of Reader Services at Library and Archives, and who was also like fairly important to how I developed in the world. So this is kind of...
That was at the National Gallery.
At the National Gallery, Canada, yeah.
And Peter was the third person I ever wrote about.
Yeah.
just as a sidebar note on this.
And what did you write about Peter?
That was like 40 years ago. I don't know. Something nice. Peter was a student at NASCAD when I worked there, and he had a show, and I truly don't remember beyond that I wrote about him.
So I'll look it up.
This may be a recurring theme, by the way, through the evening, me not being able to remember what in the hell she's talking about.
It's okay. I don't remember is better than yes or no answers.
All right. Go.
Okay, so so the next classification is sort of line art, parentheses art. And so this is where I want to take us to the last art college, NASCAD, between 1968 and 1978, which is that big catalog raisonné that Gary Neal Kennedy wrote of the college. And so when I look at this catalog, it's basically a compilation of all the international conceptual artists that came through Halifax in the time period when the art school acted as kind of a peripheral hub to a decentralized conceptual art dream. And it's interesting because in the book, there's an inventory of the spaces in the college that were really important for these kinds of activities, where the long-distance relationships with conceptual art practices could take place. And it lists 4 different gallery spaces, and it lists the boardroom, where there was social gatherings and meetings. But the library is not listed in this list of spaces. But the librarian is listed in the list of administrators, and John is in that slot for a number of those years. And there's also an essay by David McWilliam who talks about John and what it was like working for John. And he also very clearly says that the library was the center hub of NASCAD in those days. Everybody met and hung out there. And so I was just wondering if you wanted to give us some of your memories, if you have them, about people meeting in the library and hanging out there.
That was almost 20 years of time. Yeah, sure, I have some memories. I was there about a week, maybe not even quite a week, when a student at that time by the name of Robin Peck, he's a sculptor, who's actually teaches now, as far as I know, at St. Thomas University in Fredericton, was like a lot of the younger artists at the college who were students, pretty full of themselves, I guess would be an easy way to summarize it. And the library at that stage, this is 1972 or thereabouts, was not particularly large. I don't know how many books we had, but not that many, 5,000 maybe. In any event, doesn't matter. I went home one Friday night and came back Monday morning, and the entire sculpture collection, which is fairly significant in the overall because of who taught there and so on and so forth, it had all been rearranged in descending order as an artwork, which was supposed to provoke me, I think, in some way. And it didn't. I, as I recall, laughed, and it gave some students some extra hours reshelving time to get them all back in order again. So that was like my introduction to the art college in lots of ways. Another example that comes to my mind, or another something that comes to my mind was well, it's not an example because it went on for a long time. We moved, when I first started, the college was moving from up by Dalhousie to the downtown campus where it is now. And that took place over several years of time and was a huge undertaking to move us all from this one place to this other place. And to tell you the truth now, I had a specific something in mind when I started telling you this that has now left my mind as to wherever it was. So anyway, it took a long time. We did get there. And one of the, this was not what I had in mind, but this will do. One of the issues that came up was we got the final plans from the architect for the new library. Well, the first thing was, now let me back up. The first issue that came up when I got there was Gary Kennedy gave me the plans for the new building structure, and gave me the plan on this hand telling me that the library, they wanted the library to be an important component to the education of young 20th century and soon to be 21st century students. I said, cool, I'm good with that. And look at the plans, and where do they have the library? But on the 5th floor of the farthest building on campus. I came back up to Gary and I said, if you really want it to be central, I don't think that's going to work so well, particularly since you have the administration down on the 1st floor of the first building. Why don't we reverse them? So Gary, being a reasonably smart person often, not always, as witnessed the last art college, said, yeah, that makes sense to me. I hadn't thought about that. So they didn't quite reverse it, but they did move the library, so we were down the 1st floor there. But then that turned out to be problematic because there wasn't a lot of space because it was an old bank building, and on 3 floors of the 4 floors, it had huge walk-in vaults, which sounds kind of cool, and it was kind of cool, and they were just going to take these out until they realized that if they took them out, the building would probably fall in. So we had to learn over time how to use 4-3 I guess it was, walk-in vaults, what we could use them for. None of these things are really students or anybody meeting there, I realize. But that was just something that went on day in and day out. We tried to make it a place where you needed to come for one reason or another. So one of the things that we did was we got located all the mailboxes for students in the library. Everybody wants to get their mail, and so they would come get their mail. And while you're there getting your mail, come into the library when they allowed us to and have a smoke. That didn't last so long. I don't know. You have to go on to another question because I don't know. I don't know more than that. I do. I guess one of the important memories for me in terms of all that was Cliff Elin, the late Cliff Elin, as a young art student there, came and asked me if it was okay if he used the public catalog to do an artwork, and I asked him if it was going to do anything awful to the catalog. He said no. I said sure. So he cut up, I forget the name of the standard history that he cut up, but one of the standard history of art books, and then filed the pictures, the reproductions of the various artworks in the appropriate place in the catalog, which, as far as I know, here almost 50 years later is still there in the card catalog. Although the card catalog, as far as I know, is in the basement of that building and has been for a long time. So we tried to make it accommodating for what art students might want to do. And that wasn't always what the art historians thought you might want anybody to do in the library. But yeah. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's the best I can do.
Well, I appreciate your best. I do want to ask you about the yellow thresholds that are in this.
The which?
The yellow thresholds that are in the exhibition behind us.
Sure.
And do you want to tell us about them?
What do you want to know about them? They're yellow things.
I believe they're titled Perhaps my favorite color.
Is that what I titled them? Well, it is perhaps my favorite color, yellow. It was intended, well, let me back up. Emily, when we first were talking about the show, asked me if I wanted to do any kind of site-specific something here. I said, sure. I always kind of try to take advantage of opportunities. And I didn't really think of anything too much, or I couldn't come up with anything too much that I made sense to me. And then I thought and came in and looked around at what were the thresholds. If I'd really pushed, I would have done it on every threshold in here, but that might have been pushing too much. Thought could paint them yellow. Yellow because I like yellow. And for me, without titling it this, but for me, it was indeed intended to be a kind of homage to Gary Kennedy, who often did wall works in one sort or another. In fact, there still are some remnants of wall works in this building from when his show, and I'm sitting on one.
Yes.
That's right, I forgot that. Well, I was thinking of wall things. In Emily's office, there are still some remnants of wall works of Gary's. But I didn't want it to be too overt. Just that. That's why I called it what I called it. And I've already forgotten what I called it, but perhaps my favorite color. And then a related thing is the rope that's in the corner. And because I've done a lot of work trying to do straight lines of one sort or another, I thought, oh, well, it's a straight line coming down from the ceiling. And I've always been interested in just doing things that are the obvious. So it's exactly the height of the room. That's all there is to it. And then I kind of liked that it would be described as hand-painted, which it truly is. But, usually when we say something like that, we think of something slightly more decorous and skillful than slopping paint on a piece of rope for 23 points, however many feet it is.
I believe that's titled How High is High.
Okay. I made these up, as I often do, on the spur of the moment, and Emily mentioned that what's not particularly represented here is performance kinds of work, and for me, that's always been they're done, they're ephemeral, they come with the wind and go with the wind. And I guess the same here, so that the title is if I needed something, I didn't want to just call it untitled, but it's relatively meaningless title.
And is it a yellow rope painted yellow?
Is it
A yellow rope painted yellow? What color was the original rope?
the original? I don't know, whatever color rope is usually.
Some of them are yellow.
Well, some of them are yellow, that's true. Good point. I forgot about that. No, this is like, I think, real hemp. So whatever that is, kind of a brownie color, I believe.
So this kind of brings me to the next question I wanted to ask you, which is about some of the works that you produced or began to produce in the period when you were the Director of Services and Libraries at NASCAD. I guess I kind of want to root it in the book that's titled Lines. That's in the smaller gallery, but I mean, it expands into many other works that are about lines. But the ones that I'm drawn to are the ones that kind of pull in textual references. So it's not only about line work, graphic line work, and the body in relationship to graphic line work, but it's also about the body in relationship to text and language, and the way that I understand it is also working in relationship to the breath lines of Charles Olson, for example. So this is where the performative comes into your work for in my readings of it. So I guess the questions I have are, what is the significance of line to you in your work and all of those different understandings, particularly in relation to the body and breath, but also in relation to systems and processes that might constrain or be influenced by the body, or to the performance of services or tasks of administration, which also involve lines. And then I think there's also a quiet evening of performances of texts. That's another book that was produced sort of in the same time period as the Lines book, which also has a reference to a number of textual citations that may have been important.
A
to you
quiet
at the time.
evening.
Yeah, a quiet evening. Yeah. And then if you're willing to talk about it, I'm wondering if you would talk about the tattoos that you have on your arms, which are also lines.
One of the difficulties of working with two people like Emily and Felicity, who are like way smarter than I am, is that they ask kinds of questions or see kinds of things that never cross my mind to ask or see. What was your question? I'm kidding. I sort of got it. As the lines, as with much of the work that I've ever done, is because it's simple. Even so simple as to sometimes be stupid. And I don't like being stupid, but when it happens, and it does, I live with it. But lines, I got thrown into the art college, Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in 1972 at the height of its conceptualism and so on and so forth, as a reasonably naive person who, at that stage, was carving in wood and constructing with wood objects, which was like an anathema at the art college. It was like, I might as well have said, I slept with your mom last night. It was like not a thing. It was farting in church, all those kinds of bad things. And that was made clear. Add to that the fact that I don't have any particular training in the visual arts, so whatever I do has been kind of not self-taught exactly, but something like that. And I was never that interested in self-teaching all that much. And I don't know how I got on to doing lines, but I did. And it dawned on me early on that, or I shouldn't say dawned on me, because it's still dawning in a way, that even doing something as simple as trying to draw a straight line, however that may be, could be quite generative of interest and giving attention to and open doors beyond what just seems to be there. That, and I'm always asked, well, what does being a librarian have to do with any of this? And as I've said to you, I believe, as I've said to Emily, I believe, as I've said to lots of people, I believe, well, I don't think anything really, but in fact, probably does, in the sense that I have always been a collector of well, I don't think the librarian does, but my interest in literature does. And I've always been a collector of lines. I don't have a very good memory, so I don't remember plots of novels and this and that and the other thing, but I often can remember lines. And so lines is like that. It's a collection of lines from various poems, novels, and so on. And there was something else I was going to say with regard to that. Oh, a line has always for me, since I was pretty young, and and was interested in mechanical drawing. A line has always suggested to me that whole enterprise of science out there, just a stupid line. Don't ask me why exactly, but it does. It certainly is not my intention that it should to any of you be anything but a line. But to me, it brought into that whole other area of intellectual pursuit, of knowledge, and so on and so forth. And I think I just ran out of breath, so you're going to have to follow up with a question while I catch a breath again.
Do you want to tell us?
Did I answer any of your questions?
You answered many of the questions.
But I wanted to answer all of them. Did it answer all of them?
No. Well, do you want to tell us about your tattoos?
Oh, the tattoos. I thought we maybe ellipsed
Skip
around
over
the
that?
tattoos.
No.
I have, if nobody's noticed them, 2 tattoos. Uh-oh. I had these done in 1996, I think, when I was in Ottawa at the National Gallery. If any of you have been into a tattoo parlor, you have some idea of what they're like. I walked in looking kind of like I do now, which I think is reasonably normal. From my mother's point of view, reasonably normal. I said, I want to get 2 tattoos, a straight line on this arm, straight line on that arm, one blue, one black. Because I do obvious things. Tattooing seemed to me like a bruising, a scarring of your body. So what happens when you bruise or scar your body? It gets black and blue. And I wanted to run from here to here. And I would just assume that you just did it freehand. Well, you would have thought that I'd ask them to, I don't know what. I'm looking around, at tattoos, weird tattoos, piercings all over the place, and I just want these 2 straight lines on my arm. And they're acting as though, I don't know what. And I finally came down to, we won't be able to do a straight line. I said, what do you mean you won't be able to do a straight line? Well, it won't be straight. I said, but it'll be reasonably straight, won't it? And he said, yeah. I said, well, that's good enough, but it won't be straight though. So I got around this problem of getting this tattoo by saying, I should tell you, before we go any farther, I'm going to need your names and your permissions because we're going to make a movie about this. And you have to give me your names and your permission. Oh, okay. And they went ahead and did it. So that's called pulling rank or something, I think. So what I was interested in was everybody was getting tattoos, so I was interested in doing what everybody's doing on the one hand, but on the other hand, what I was interested in is it just usually comes out like this, just a little bit out of my shirt. And you'd be surprised at how many people actually notice something like that. I've been surprised over the years that they all of a sudden, you can see it. If you're sitting at a table and going about your business, all of a sudden somebody fixates. They're not looking at your eyes or your head or something, but they're looking at you, and you realize they've noticed something that's out of the ordinary, I guess. So it's interested me that it's made me into a permanent artwork and a performance, as far as I'm concerned, that's always going on day in and day out until I pass away. It wasn't done by me, so that it kind of interests me. I just asked them to do it. That's the only work of mine that's been the case. And it just really does interest me that people notice it. And then if they're brave enough, they ask me about it, and they notice. I say, "Oh yeah, well, yeah, oh yeah, I noticed. I thought there was another one." And then you can see going through the mind, how do they connect? Does the line come up here and go down around its belly button? You can see it going through people's heads. And finally, because I sometimes tease people, not often, but now and again, I admit that it just goes up to here and then it stops. That's the end of it. The other thing that has interested me that it's a performance, that's an ongoing performance in some kind of a way, and how little you need to do to make an artwork, to embody one in some way. But I've been interested, I have offered the work to the National Gallery of Canada, and I told them that it was their choice. They had to wait until I died. After that, it was their choice. They could skin me and treat it as a drawing, or they could stuff me and treat it as a sculpture. Their choice. I don't think they took me seriously, to tell you the truth. At least Diana Nemiroff, I don't think, took me seriously. So that's it about the... But it's part of, I guess it was... I was interested that everybody at the time was getting tattoos, and part of my interest in terms of what's the least that you need to do something that might interest other people, and it as something to look at and think about. My mother said it's the stupidest thing I ever did, but...
Yeah, I think the oscillation between, what is... It's such a cliche, but like what is art and what is not art is one of the lines that your work kind of continuously plays with.
Yeah, probably. I sort of think of it more in different kind of terms of reference, I guess, in a sense of I've always liked the thought that of people standing there and looking at it and saying, "Well, my kid could do that," which is often true, not always, but often.
So what's skilled and what's de-skilled?
Well, I wouldn't want to say that kids are de-skilled. But I certainly have been always interested, and this is just probably a cop-out for me, that I don't have very many skills, so what defense can I make of that fact? Well, intellectually, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in, you don't need a whole lot of skill to do something, which may just be a defense mechanism. But I'm not going back to Freud to check that out.
No, but I think we can probably move to architecture -- equality.
-- what?
Equality.
Equality?
Mm-hmm. These are invented classifications.
Man, you're about to lose me on the deep end here. Okay,
yeah.
Go.
So
I'm ready. I'm seated.
Because I think you do have, you do have like an incredible sort of roster of skills in many different areas, and for this, what I was really thinking about is the key role that you've played in the Atlantic Canada region, as the director of Struts, but also as member of arts administration associations like APEGA. And you've sat on many prize committees and arts council juries, and you've had sort of like a very prolific structural role, if I can put it that way, in the region. And you've also been really fiercely regional in your advocacy for better infrastructure for art and artists. And so the exhibition's title, À rebours, which is on the wall behind the screen, but it's a wooden, like a plank of wood. I think this is a 4x8 or something like that. And it has À rebours stenciled on it, and then it has a series of hand-carved lines that go against the grain. But the title, À rebours, can be traced to a novel by J.K. Huysmans, a French novelist. It's a fairly famous French novel titled À rebours, but then it's translated into Against the Grain in English. And I can sort of summarize a few themes of the novel, which is it's essentially the story of a dandy who's the center of a metropolitan avant-garde art scene. And he rejects all the excesses of the city because of its moral and psychic emptiness, and then he isolates himself in the country in order to build an aesthetic world on his own terms. So this periphery to the metropolitan cultural hub becomes the freedom that he creates for himself to live against the grain. And to explore what other modes of living aesthetically could be produced in the absence of kind of dominant cultural structures. Emily tells me that you don't recall ever reading this novel.
No, I came across it because Dennis Young, who was the art historian at the art college, wanted it bought for the collection, and it came in, and À rebours and Against the Grain, a Dover publication, I think. And I thought that was kind of a cool title.
Fair. But I'd like to use it as sort of an entry point to think about some of the works in the exhibition that look at art as a process or as an infrastructure that can be challenged, and which implies that it can be inequitable or that it can be subject to a process of redistribution. And so what I'm thinking of is monuments to inequality.
Mm-hmm.
Also the appropriations of art in America, which and the Canadian art stands on its own. So the infrastructure of art criticism.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another work which I quite like, which is a hardcover book titled "What is Art?" And then these sort of stamped frames enhanced art, and then there's like these little frames that are coming out of the book. So there's sort of a cluster of works in the show that think about what art infrastructure is or might be, or how it can be entered into and redistributed in some way. What are your thoughts on that? What are these works? Where do these works come from for you?
Oh my goodness. Monuments to Inequality came about because I had all these shims, because I was doing work on rebuilding a house. The art in America came about because I had all these art in Americas, and I thought the covers were kind of nice. The Tolstoy book came about because I had the Tolstoy book, and I was curious as to what art is. The Canadian art stands on its own because at the time, and this happened many times over the years, but at the time that I made the original one, which was about 1996, which turned out not to stand on its own very well, Canadian art had so pissed me off that I wanted to do some kind of work making fun of it. And I had this Canadian art there, and I had that stand that's there from something, I don't know what. In other words, where I'm going with that is is that these are all materials that were at hand. and which really up until pretty much started the work that I've been doing the last 4 or 5 years with the grids, where I'm using things I've had to go out and buy. But before that, most things were done on materials that I happen to have at hand. And I don't know how I got making the monuments. I was making all kinds of different monuments at the time. The only one that other one that's sort of here is this one here, and outside the galleries. But I did a whole bunch of different kinds of monuments, and I started doing those because I did have these shims lying around, and always was interested in. It's like the Duck Decoys paint portraits of doing work where it's entirely encompassed by the materials. So those monuments hold together because I put whatever color paint on it, and I put another shim on it and let it dry, and so it's all held together by the paint. The Duck Decoys, that's all there. I mean, there's the base or the support, but then it's all just paint. Nothing more, nothing less. And I've totally lost track as to where I might have been going with that, but I guess it's back to whatever I had at hand. I had all these. I started doing those Art in America, and when I was in Ottawa on a research fellowship at the National Gallery, and I had a little tiny apartment, and was buying these Art in Americas, and then what do I do with them after I read them? So 2 things I did. I don't know if I showed you these. I went through. I started buying 2 copies, so that I could have the cover to do things like this. But then I also started going through and cutting out all the images from every magazine, and I'd paint one side of it. And then for that issue, I'd put them all in a little paper bag, which I labeled Art in America, September 1996, and so on. So that Art in America gets reduced to all these little sound bites, as it were. Why was I telling you that story? Got me.
I was asking you what kind of a critique of art in America you were making.
Oh, the only one where there's really a critique from my perspective is the Canadian art stands on its own, which is meant to be a critique. And turned out that I was, quite perceptive about it. It was that there was an interesting visual. I was always been interested in, my basic interest has always been that paint does one thing. If it doesn't do anything else, it covers something up. And so you can cover up selected parts of the magazine and make some image there. And the other aspect of paint is if you put enough coats on, then it becomes apparent what's true from the first coat, that it's got a body. You have to put on quite a few coats before it's perceptible that it's got a body. So that comes into play on some of the art in America to a certain extent. But it was something, an interesting looking thing that I thought could be made into something more interesting. I didn't ever see it as a critique of art in America particularly. Canadian art is another matter. That was meant to be jerks.
Is that because they weren't covering what you thought they should be covering?
Well, they weren't covering anything down here. Let's not get off onto that topic.
So should I ask you about One-Way Ticket or not?
Sure.
Would you like to tell me a little bit more about One-Way Ticket?
What would you like to know? And everybody may not know who John Bentley Mays was. John Bentley Mays was the art critic. Well, he did a number of things, but he was the art critic for Canada's national newspaper, the Globe and Mail, for many, many years. And he never wrote about anything in the Atlantic region that I was aware of. So I got it in my mind to do two things, I guess. One was to make a little book photocopying all of everything that he wrote in the Globe and Mail, up to the point that the book went. He continued for a while after that. And the One-Way Ticket was that I sent him a letter inviting him to come to Halifax and more of the region if he could, to do studio visits and to see what was going on here and so on and so forth. And enclosed is a one-way ticket for you to come down here. He was on his own about getting back. He declined to do this. Wrote me and said thanks, but no thanks. I got the name of One-Way Ticket from a novel, I think Muriel Sparks. Muriel, what's her name? Doesn't matter. I stole the title from something that I was reading. He then subsequently saw the work in Toronto and became hysterical. Wrote me a letter about what an awful, nasty, terrible, rotten, stinking, just awful, terrible, not nice person I was. But he didn't come down. He finally did come down and took a swipe at Alex Colville, but that's about it. That, again, was a critique. The Atlantic region, in terms of its culture, has been left off of the documented and critical response that's mainly come from central Canada forever. Yeah. He was just a blatant example about it. And I couldn't have been happier when he wrote me this really nasty letter. What are you talking about, mister? You never mind.
I don't think that's the only nasty letter he's written.
Probably not, no. Certainly not, yeah, probably not. Yeah.
So I'm just going to bring us back, I think, to the poultry -- friendship classification.
Okay.
Again.
All right.
It's also a way for us to open up the floor to questions. But you once told me to...
I lied.
You tell me a lot of things. I don't do all of them. So the poultry friendship, chickens friends, is because there are several works with ducks and chickens in them in the show, and to me they're sort of like works that imply a certain sociality.
Certain what?
Sociality, social relations with ducks and chickens.
I've never had any with them, but okay.
But you once told me to read the biography of a man named John Quinn, specifically the book *The Man and His Friends*. So it's a 600-page biography, and it's basically the story of a man who has a 600-page biography written about him because he was always showing up in photographs next to the famous artists of the modernist movement, and in art and literature. And he's also shows up in their archives because of prolific correspondence and collecting the works of these of people like W.B. Yeats, Ezra Pound, James Joyce, Brancusi, Picasso, Matisse. So somebody who's sort of incidental, but then ends up with a 600-page biography written about him, and there have been other biographies written about him as well. And then I look around this room, like not only you in the chairs, but also the works that are in the lobby here, which are sort of works that were made about John. And I think we're in a similar sort of network of affinity and affection. And so you've had such a significant impact, not only on your local culture, but also on individual artists that, kind of move in and out of the Atlantic region for various reasons. And you've also corresponded with many, many artists through your administrative career, and you've collected many works. And so this is sort of a systematic process of how art, economically and socially gets produced and moved around and distributed. And so I'm interested in how that relationship building is important to you, and if it enters into the work that you have here in the exhibition, whether you think about these things. You might not, it might just happen intuitively. But for example, the duck decoy paintings have a particular process built into them, and I'd love to hear you speak about that. Or the Strange Tales of Our World 1 to 3, which are the chicken-based works. And then, or if there's a particular work in this room that's a work made by somebody else in reference to you that you'd like to speak about, and love to hear about that as well.
Well, where you started with, of the fact of the matter is that for a good deal of my life, 30 years, I was hired in positions where I was asked, I thought, to develop, to enhance, to encourage, to whatever all words one might want to use, bring people together to achieve kinds of ends, to bring them together to use resources that were put together for them to be able to do what they wanted to do. But I was paid pretty good money. Well, maybe not when I worked at Struts, but when I worked at the art college, I was paid pretty good money to do this. And so I've always been fond of Bob Dylan's song Hurricane, and there's a line that goes something to the effect that Hurricane supposedly says, "It's my job, I do it for pay, and then I just as soon go on my way." And I've always felt that to a large extent. I got hired to do these things, and so what else would I do but these things that I got hired to do? To the first part of your question, which I don't know how how you segued into my stupid chickens in there and ducks, I have to honestly say. When you said about sociability, all I could think of was when our ducks the male ducks would go out and try to eat their offspring, which was not terribly social.
It's a metaphor.
Oh. See, I'm not that subtle. I'm not sure what you're asking with regard to those works. The three works, the chicken and duck works, that are just, what I was interested in is how little I needed to tell you that you knew it was a chicken and you knew it was a duck. Didn't have to do too much to do that. Just take a paintbrush and carefully draw a little outlined figure of the duck or the chicken. Now, what's also interesting is that I put them on the or I think it's interesting, put them on the support where I put them, and then there's a story, because there's two of them, and maybe this is where you're coming at in terms of sociability or something. There's two of them in some kind of visual relationship to one another that created a story. Now, much to some people's dismay, the story is told on the top of the picture frames where most of us can't see it, what the story is. Did you see it?
It was pointed out to me.
It was pointed out to you. And that was both deliberate and not deliberate, because a lot of these things I don't really think about that much. I was not meaning for the story that the image told me a story, which is what I wrote on the top. It's not a story that's implicit in the image at all. It's not a story that's important to see the image, which is why it's up there as opposed to someplace else. And I was thinking about all the artworks over the course of history where that's true. You know, the artist did things that nobody will ever see because you need to do them for whatever reason. The other duck ones, the duck decoy paint portrait, really arose. Well, again, that I could make an image of something that everybody recognized. Oh, that's a duck, without giving you much information. Ducks, in my kind of juvenile mind, are kind of orangey colored. Not many of them around here are orangey color, I have to admit. But in my mind, somehow that rang a bell. And if you use the paint, same paint, and I use the paint to stick the duck image onto the canvas so that it's hard to see it. So it's decoyed in some way, but it's also a portrait because in paint. I don't know, that just sort of delighted me. And it's a kind of stupid, easy thing to do. I have a whole bunch of them always on the go that I'm slowly working on. And it's all done with paint. Just the same paint, the same orange paint, although Stevenson went out of business, so someday I'm going to run out of that paint. But it just kind of delighted me to do that. Not too much more than that. And that it was, well, I guess I should say another aspect to it all. It has interested me that about the whole notion of a multiple and how I do the same activity pretty much the same way over and over again, but they all come out different. I do a straight line pretty much the same way, but it's different. That's interested me in some kind of a way.
And how do you decide where the duck decoy paintings go?
Where they
Go.
Yeah. Well, whoever wants to pay me the big bucks for them, what do you mean? Oh, no, I gave you one today, didn't I? Mm. I guess that's undermines that. I've usually given them away to people who are interested in them. And sometimes, like with you, I keep forgetting when you tell me. So it takes 3 or 4 times. No, that's all. I've just given them away. Or sometimes I've given them to, when arts and centers are having auctions to raise money, I've given them for that reason, for that purpose.
Do you know how many are out there?
No.
No. We did try to reconstitute the collection for the show.
Emily found out all kinds of things that I've totally forgotten about these things, so no, I don't know. Nope. I can't remember when I first started making them, to tell you the truth. Some, 50 or 60 or 100 years ago, if anybody gives a damn, some PhD student can, do some research on this and figure these things out. 1999? Who said that? Oh, well, she was shaking her head, so I wasn't sure.
Do you have anything else to add about duck decoy paintings? No?
No, I think that's more than enough. 1999, okay. Well, that sounds about right, but Emily made me take this out of something where I said that I've never really been interested. I shouldn't say that. It hasn't been a high priority to exhibit, which has been true. I've always had enough opportunities that came my way. I haven't gone a lot of seeking them out particularly. Partly because I pretty consistently work, but I'm not terrifically prolific. If it looks like there's a lot of work in there, then you have to keep in mind that that's like over 50 years. So over 50 years, you're going to accumulate some amount of things. But I've also been always not interested, I shouldn't say not interested. I've been incredibly erratic because I've never seen it as something where it's not how I made my living or something, making art. So I've always been very negligent about keeping a record about things, like when did I start making them. And then Emily does a show and she turns over the monuments to inequality and finds that, well, I did indeed write on the bottom of them when I made this. Thank goodness, or we'd never know. I forget what your question was. I don't think that was the answer to it, but that's okay.
There's many answers to a single question. But and then if in this room, is there a particular work that you kind of would like to tell us a story about, or that you enjoy? These are the works that are made.
Well, I didn't particularly, no, I don't know. Now you're just trying to embarrass me. I can't say that your painting is the one, because that would. And if I said that Aaron Brubaker's is, then somebody would. Well, I guess if I were to acknowledge one over any of the others, it would be Graham's portrait of me, the little doll portrait. I don't know what maquette, whatever you call it. And that's not because I enjoy at all looking at it, because I don't. I mean, it's not an enjoyable thing to look at, let's face it. But as with all artworks, as with all things that we make, they carry with them all kinds of meaning other than what the obvious meanings are, what the artist may have intended as a meaning. And in this case, it's that it has a kind of, for lack of a better word, it's kind of sentimental value, in that it was given to me when I left Struts as a, I guess, thank you something, to make me cringe whenever I look at it and think, that's what I look like. Hey, okay. You wish it might be other, but that's the way it is. Thanks, Amanda, for getting this done. No, but seriously, I don't really cringe, but it has that kind of particular meaning that's not meaning to anybody else but myself, and so that would stand out in that respect, I think. I'm sorry, I should have picked your painting. I'm sorry.
It's okay. You can try to deflect your feelings or our attention from your feelings with humor, but we know that you have them. Which is something that I've always really appreciated about the work that I've seen from you. is this, whether it's in your intention or not, there's this incredible intuitive approach to how you do work that looks very, it looks like intellectualized work, but really it's a very intuitive approach to something that looks, potentially very dry and repetitive. And so when I look at the wall of works that other people have made in reference to you, or they're like loving embraces, I think.
Okay.
Okay, but and then maybe this is a good time.
I'm sure it's a good time for something.
for other people to have comments or questions.
Somebody else to try to embarrass me or something? Okay. Somebody can have mine, because it keeps seeming a little weird. I keep holding it up here because it seems like it'd be a little weird otherwise. No, I don't think so. In a way, it's been more. I mean, some of the work, the vast majority of the work has never been out of my studio. So seeing it outside the studio is kind of revelatory, just in that respect. Excuse me. It's been kind of amazing to see all the drawings that I hadn't really seen for a long, long time, and to see them presented as they probably should be, as opposed to how I presented them the only time I ever showed them. So all these things are seeing the balsa wood paintings that I haven't seen out of the studio. I mean, they were out of the studio for an exhibit in the early 80s in a different kind of way, but then to see them in a totally different kind of presentation was really pretty exciting, and made me think about some other kinds of things in terms of whatever kind of relationship I may have to some kinds of art from the past. Namely, thinking about some kinds of abstract paintings that I don't usually think of my work in that kind of context at all, except in kind of a negative way. But any kind of revelations or anything, I don't think so particularly. I've been happy to walk around and not be embarrassed by anything. And think, why did she pick that out of all the things that she might have picked, or anything like that? But I'm reasonably, both of these curator people who are friends kind of see relationships between work and so on and so forth, which I don't do so much. I go in, I look at it, and I look at this work, and I look at that work, and I can see, there's some kinds of things, relationships in some way, but I don't think about it that much. I look at them, I think, I'm still interested in that. That still interests me. That one not so much. And sometimes it's a matter of trying to recreate in my mind what it was that I might have been thinking about when I did it. So those kinds of things, more than anything, I guess, have been, and that, I mean, it's not a small thing. There's works here, like this one behind the screen, that they wanted to cover up because, I don't know, I think it's been defaced and they just don't want me to see. That's never been exhibited. I've never seen it outside my studio or in the attic or lying on its side in some place. And from my perspective, it's a really important piece because, as I said at the start, when I got to NASCAD, I was carving. And that was using all my carving tools on a piece of wood that was lying around the house that we were renovating in Halifax. I thought, oh, and I just bought this book for the library. And I thought, now, I mean, how does this work? Why do you all of a sudden think I can cut across the grain on here and it's our rebours? So it's like a huge, from my perspective, hugely important kind of transitional thing from what I started out doing and somehow got into at NASCAD.
It actually leads to another question I had, if that's all right.
I was afraid, yeah.
Well, I was just wondering, like, so
Well, there's some kinds of things that I continue to do. I continue to make straight lines, willy-nilly.
I guess at least change the circles.
No, but the work with these grids, if you want to call them grids, I somehow don't feel I've exhausted it yet. So I'm still I still have some that I'm doing at home as we speak. Doing them. There's one that I'm doing that's really quite different and using much less rigorous way of going about it. So I don't know. I mean, no, nothing is really. Excuse me. No. My guess is that it'll just come willy-nilly one day, because I'll say, "Oh shit, I could." Whatever, I could. But that hasn't happened yet. No, I'm still feel that there's things, and I'm still kind of figuring out. In terms of trying to write something recently about the grid work, realize that something about in terms of its relationship to all the art that I grew up with that I hated, and that I hadn't really thought of before. So I think that'll continue for a while at any rate. But I'm getting old, so I don't know, you know, at some point I'm going to become enfeebled and it'll have to be entirely conceptual. What am I reading now? I just finished a novel by I can't pronounce her name, a Polish woman. Do you know her name, Jemmy? Jemmy gave it to me for Christmas, a novel called Flights that somehow engrossed me, but I didn't like it at all. It's a very strange book. She won the Nobel Prize. So I just finished that. I started just recently the letters of John Cheever that are pretty interesting. And I'm reading the whole complete works of an Anglo-Irish novelist, Elizabeth Bowen. This one's called Last September. So I bought them all. I started the first one that she wrote, and I'm going to read all through them. She's one of these incredibly smart, too smart for her own good, English women of the 20th century, all of whom kind of fascinate me. There's quite a few of them. And she has the most obscene syntax that's very difficult to follow, or I find often very difficult to follow. John Cheever said said that she can describe things as well as anybody in the world has been able to describe things, but then underneath it, is there anything there? He said it more eloquently, which I have to agree with, but she fascinates me. She fascinates me also because she had an affair over 25 years or so with a diplomat from Halifax, Nova Scotia. So I always like those kinds of coincidences. So that's what I'm reading. Oh, and I'm also reading a book that Andrea gave me, Orhan Pamuk's Plague Nights. It's very hard going. Sorry. Yes?
It sounds like you have a lot of books on the go at once.
Well, I have ones that I read down in the studio, and I have ones that I read before bed. And I have ones that I read when I'm in between those two places. You don't want to be without a book. I almost brought one this evening just in case I had to wait, but I thought it might annoy. Yeah, I usually do have several books going for one reason or another. I really only have two. The Pamuk book is, I've kind of put it aside. It's sitting there waiting for me to come back to it. Yeah. I don't know if anybody realizes that. I'm sure Jordy does, but whether most of the rest of you realize that there are so many really wonderful things to read, and there's just not enough time. So you have to have several going at any one time if you're going to even come close. And then somebody recommended this book by Dickens to me the other day, so I bought it. He didn't tell me that it was longer than the damn Bible. I don't know what I'm going to do with that. Yes.
Okay, so that guy
John Bentley Mays?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you still have the letter that he sent you?
Well, yes, I do someplace, but someplace.
Can you remember the word more precisely?
That he used?
Yeah.
No, not really. I think I slightly exaggerated when I said all the things that he called me, but I was close. Well, yes, yeah, it was a very threatening letter. Yeah, I think he did, actually. I've forgotten that. Yeah. I mean, he had a very big ego, so I think he thought I would make more art about him.
Where did he encounter the piece?
I did the piece for a show that I got invited to be in, one of the few Artists Run Center things, and back in the days when they did this, that was going to go to centers, about 6 or 7 centers across Canada. So I did whatever number of copies that I needed for those, and one of the places was, I think it was Mercer Union in Toronto. So we saw it there. He really, I'd forgotten. I think he did threaten me with legal action if I persisted in defaming him. And I sat there thinking, man, I just invited you to come here. I put together your collected writings. What more do you want me to do? For Christ's sake. I mean, because the letter my invitation was, you could probably relatively easily read that I was being somewhat sardonic at best. But it was pretty straightforward invitation to come down and take a look around. I think I did make some reference to that he'd not been here, but it wasn't in an overtly negative way. It was just that I know that you haven't been able to come. Why don't you come? Here's a one-way ticket to come on down, or here's a ticket to come on down. I didn't tell him that I'd done this book, but have to admit. But I do have the letter someplace, Simone, but I'm not going to go try to find it.
Wait, you are?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. If it falls, because it came up sometime in the not too distant future, but I don't know where I put it then. Yeah, sorry.
So, Emily, we didn't really talk about timing for this.
No, I think, if there's no other questions, we can rest. Are there other questions?
No?
Thank you both so much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
John, for all your stories. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to talk about?
Not really. I got in because I'd been wanting to say something about rebours for whatever reason. No, I don't think so. I've still been thinking back to your question about sociability and so on and so forth. And it probably sounded, I don't know what, in terms of it, I do it for pay and I just soon go on my way. And I guess all I mean by that in lots of ways is that I got paid to do these things.
It's okay to get paid to do things.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but it's always seemed to me that on lots of these, what I don't like doing is getting particularly something like sentimental about some of these kinds of things. It's always seemed to me that I worked in a public institution and was there to help people do something. That something was in large measure things that I conceived of that the people who were hiring me wanted me to do. Whether they really wanted me to do them or not, God knows. But that there just needed to be more in the world of just not altruism, because it's not altruism. I got paid to do these things. But there's something beyond just the job that's involved with it all, is what I'm trying to say with something like that in my inarticulate sort of way of talking. But Felicity, I'm running out of breath. So, no, I don't have anything more to say. Or if I do, I don't have the way to do it.
Totally fair, and thank you very much for coming back to that point, because I think that it is a really important one when we are able to look at all the work that you do in the same space together, and then also think about it in relationship to the other work that you've done that you were getting paid for, if we want to make those kinds of distinctions. I think that those are really important overlaps, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you to everybody for coming, yeah.